There were two children on the ground near each boat. When we were all aboard, they detached the silk hydrogen hoses and rolled them back up to the shack, where they carefully hung them up. They then returned to us, and one held a rope at the bow of each boat, and the other held a rope at the boat's stern. One of the children's passengers had a blank pistol, and the sort used for starting races at track meets. He stood up and yelled in a high, clear voice, "Is everybody ready?" A shrill and deafening yes was heard, mixed with the deeper voices of Mr. F. and myself. At this signal, the children, standing near the boats, all gave their ropes a sharp pull, which seemed to unhook the boats from the ground, and they all ran around the pole in the direction we were heading, giving us a good, fast start. The boats were joined together to form the rim of a wheel. The poles going through the brass oarlocks of the boats formed the spokes of this wheel. The spokes were attached to a big brass ring, or hub of the wheel, and this whole gigantic merry-go-round revolved around the 75-foot pole, which was pointing straight up to the sky and was threaded like a screw. The balloons lifted to the boats around and around the huge screw up into the air. The balloon merry-go-round gained speed and gained altitude. The pole was well greased, so that by the time we neared the top, we were going very fast. I asked F1 what happened when we reached the top of the pole. Do we quickly deflate the balloons and revolve back down to the ground, around the pole in the opposite direction? Of course not, said F1. We fly right off the pole and into the air. How do we keep the wheel straight when it's in the air? You'll see, he said. We soon reached the top of the merry-go-round, lunged upward as lost its grip on the pole. The wind immediately started to carry us off over the island. We were gaining altitude fast and, of course, still spinning around at great speed. I must admit, this was a truly delightful and exciting ride, unlike any other balloon experience I have ever had. I saw now how the boats were kept level. A child in each boat held the ripcord of the boat's balloon. Whenever a boat went a little higher than the others, the ripcord would be pulled, releasing a little hydrogen until the boat was again on the same level. You must only be able to make short trips, I told F1. If you constantly have to release gas to make the merry-go-round level. That's right, he answered. The length of our trips depend on many things, such as the calmness of the water, how well we distribute the weight of the boats, and how skillfully we control the ripcords. But you understand, he added, the balloon merry-go-round wasn't built for travel, but rather for short pleasure trips. Oh, of course, I said. The balloon merry-go-round was heading directly for the mountain. I saw that we were going to fly over it. I asked P1 if this were not dangerous. It isn't dangerous, but it's rather unfortunate because it always means a short trip. Why? I asked. Because a huge crater of volcanic mountain is full of hot air which forms sort of a vacuum. When we fly over the center, the merry-go-round is sucked downward rather violently, and we always use up a lot of gas controlling it and keeping it level. Isn't this hazardous? I asked. No, said F1. By the time we reach the mountain, we will be high enough to clear it by a great distance. The only danger in taking a ride in this is landing on the ground or on the mountain, or worst of all, in the mountain when the wind is calm. Krakatoa is a small island where there is any wind at all. It will carry the merry-go-round out to sea. Once when we first got it, we took a trip on a very calm day. We went straight up, spun around a while, and gradually lost altitude, landing in a forest of palm trees. No one was hurt, but some of the boats were damaged and one of the balloons was torn. Since then, we have only risked trips when there was wind. We were nearing the mountain, and I leaned over the side of my boat to look down at the crater. There was a thick gray smoke crawling around the inside. It was like looking into a horrible pit full of elephants. When we were directly over the mountain, there was a sickening atmosphere of hot air permeated with sulfurous gases. The merry-go-round started tossing around violently over the pit, and the children with the ripcords kept a careful watch directly across the giant wheel at opposite boats to keep the merry-go-round as steady and level as possible. Hanging on tightly, I leaned over the side of the boat in order to have a direct look into the volcanic crater itself. In places where the smoke had cleared a bit, I could see a lake of thick molten lava boiling and bubbling in slow motion. It was a sickening, frightening sight as I was leaning over the merry-go-round. Suddenly plunged downward, then swayed from side to side as the children studied it. I must have taken a deep gasp of breath out of fear, I suppose, and my lungs were suddenly filled with hot, sulphurous fumes. The merry-go-round was still spinning fast, as well as pitching and rocking in the air. I hastily drew my head back into the boat, shut my eyes, and lay down on the bottom of the boat. I could hear the rumbling of the mountain beneath me mixed with the hissing noise of the hydrogen being released from the balloons. I think I was as close to being sick then as it is possible for anyone to be. We were soon over the mountain and in fresh, calm air again, and I sat up feeling considerably better. To tell you the truth, sir, said F1, who apparently could well see that I had nearly lost my British breakfast. I was nearly sick myself that time. The mountain seems unusually violent this morning. I hope this isn't a bad sign. I took this to be a remark of a young balloonist comforting an older one who had nearly made a fool of himself. I told him that my behavior was quite inexcusable. Flying over water in the spinning airship was completely enjoyable. The magnificent seascape of the Pacific Ocean passed before your eyes half of the time, and the Krakatoa in its entirety was beneath you for your careful observation with each turn of the merry-go-round. The island looked beautiful from the air. Its vegetation was so rich, warm, and soft-looking. The mountain looked so fearful and exciting. The magnificent houses of all nations looked like extraordinary doll-houses on felt lawns, and the Krakatoan's crystal house shone like a jewel. The contrast between the trimmed interior and the untrimmed ring of the jungle around the island was easy to see from our boats. The island looked like a formal garden surrounded by a bushy, untrimmed hedge. After a flight lasting approximately 35 minutes, we were near the surface of the water. The children, controlling their ripcords like experts, lowered the merry-go-round gently and smoothly into the ocean. We made one complete turn in the water and came slowly to a stop. Well, I exclaimed, that was undoubtedly the most thrilling and unusual trip I have ever had the pleasure of taking. The children in the boats, Mr. F, and I then all leaned back and relaxed a while in the sun, looking up at the balloons, which were now half empty, bobbing back and forth in the wind. Suddenly, one of the boys the same one who had fired the starting gun, stood up and said, "All right, everybody, let's go." At this command, the rest of the children stood up and carefully deflated their balloons and folded them up in their boats, without letting any part of them touch the water. They folded them lengthwise first, then rolled them from the top towards the bottom, where the gas escape was, thus forcing all of the gas out of them and making small, neat bundles. They opened the little lockers in the boats, where the sails were, took the sails out, and replaced them with the folded balloons. Each boat had one main sail. How do you sail these boats when they are all attached together like a wheel? I asked. And what do you use for masts? These were foolish questions, I immediately realized, for while I was asking them, I managed to figure out these problems for myself. First of all, the children detached the boats from one the other at their bows and sterns. When this was done, they were still attached to each other by the poles which formed the spokes of the giant wheel. These poles were obviously the masts when the boats were used for sailing. The children, 2 on each pole, all pushed together towards the center hub until the poles slid out through the brass oar-lock rings on the boat. Then, still working, 2 on each pole, they unscrewed the poles from the brass hub in the center. They all unscrewed their poles except one boy, the boy who gave the commands. He pulled his pole in with the hub still attached to it, unscrewed the hub in his boat, and put it away in a separate locker. Now that they each had their mast, it was a simple problem to put them into the mast holes. Mr. F and I did our best to work as efficiently as any of the other crew members. Soon, the mainsail was rigged up and we were ready to sail back to the island. Only the need for a boom was absent from this compact invention. We lowered the center boards and lined up. It was evidently the custom to race home. The boy who gave the signals took out his gun, fired it, and we were homeward bound as fast as the wind would take us. I am afraid it was more of a hindrance than a capable assistant. I was more of a hindrance than a capable assistance of young F1. We finished the race last by about 7 minutes. The boat moored to a dock near the freighter in the hidden inlet, and we assembled on shore. F1 explained to me that the boy who had given the signals was the captain of the day, some sort of honor each child received in turn. The captain of the day told the rest of us that since this was my first trip in the balloon merry-go-round, the results of the boat race wouldn't count on the official scoring sheet. F1 let out a whooping cheer at this, which made me feel quite badly. The captain of the day then took me aside and told me in the most polite way that thought it would be an excellent idea if I learned a bit more about sailing. I now found myself to be a citizen of Krakatoa. I assured him that I would. The captain of the day then closed the meeting by saying that the merry-go-round would be reassembled around the dying pole right after supper. And I want you all to be here to help, he said, looking sternly in my direction. After 40 years of school teaching, I found myself being ordered about by a child. I couldn't help but find this heretofore impossible turnabout assuming. I was indeed far away from the usual dull school routines I so disliked. I'll be there, I said in a loud voice, as everybody looked at me and laughed. The whole trip had taken about 5 hours, and we had therefore missed lunch. I devoured an excellent supper at the Bees Chop House, and then Mr. F and I reported to the flying pole. The captain of the day rang the bell on the top of the shack, assembling all of the children, and we were divided into 8 groups of 5. S1 and 8-2 were still busy. With 5 on each boat, we had the merry-go-round reassembled and ready to go in less than half an hour. I will confess, though, that after this busy second day on the fabulous island, I was well ready for bed and slept like a top.